specifically addressing fellowship. It's named fellowship. And if fellowship and unity is part of what helps to prepare us and make us be acceptable to Jesus, this is a good place to look at an absolute declaration of what fellowship can look like and is expected to look like. John, in typical fashion, just like in the gospel, there's a clear black and white. There aren't shades of gray. You're in, you're out. You're on, you're off. You're with me, you're against me. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of wiggle room for swerving all over the road. So in this text we see John addressing fellowships and actually the requirements for true fellowship. Okay? Now the Greek word used here for fellowship is koinonia. And many of us are familiar with it. We understand what it means. The definition is participation, communion, spiritual fellowship, a fellowship in the Spirit, a sharer, a partner, a participant who mutually belongs and shares fellowship. Now, most of us get that. We understand there's this idea of gathering, there's this idea of communicating with each other, being in fellowship of koinonia. But if we dig a little bit deeper into that word, koinonia, which is translated, and get down to the root of that word, it comes from a word, koinos. And the word koinos means common. Particularly, it means stripped of specialness. So when we think of fellowship, we think we don't, it's something that we've been stripped of any specialness. And that makes sense when you come to Christ. And the idea of confession, the idea of specialness is kind of goes away. We all become one. You know, we sing the song, we're all the same. We're all part of the same predicament. We all suffer from the same affliction, this human nature that's at odds with virtually everything that God calls us to. So when John's speaking about this, he's talking about this fellowship, this gathering where there's this commonality, which is stripped of specialness, that we all become one. When we look at each other, we will tend to see, oh, you're a person that suffered the same plight and affliction I had. And you were you were saved, rescued from the plight as I was. So we come to this point of commonality where we're on an equal plane. It's a leveling of the playing surface. You know, I often hear within the church people saying, and it's usually common along the lines of, well, you know, that's personal. That's none of their business. And, well, according to God's words, things are not to be kept from God or from each other. That's part of fellowship, is walking into this light to be seen as we truly are. In fact, the text says if we walk in darkness, we have no fellowship. And then it goes on to say in the text that confessing of sins is part of this lack of specialness, that we're all the same. Here's who I am. There's no pretense. There's no Adam and Eve covering ourselves up. This is who we are. This is who I am. As we say, according to God's word, things are not to be kept from God or each other. That's part of the thing in the book of Acts where it says they had everything in common. And I suspect it was the transgressions too. It was everything was in common. Darkness is not our friend. Functioning in the shadows, apart from the knowledge of our brothers and sisters, is not our friend. It's a snare. It's one of Satan's oldest tricks. And it manifests a number of ways. In the garden it was, ooh, let me tell you something. This is going to be our little secret. That's the thing that the sexual predator will use. Don't tell mom and dad. This is our little secret. And there's always a move towards secrecy in the dark, which ultimately kills fellowship. As I said, our text tells us no fellowship with God, our limited fellowship with each other. That our relationship with each other is largely dependent on our relationship with God. They go hand in hand. To have one without the other is a ludicrous concept. And a lot of times we think that if we are on a horizontal plane, very closely connected, that makes us close to God. But our text says something possibly a little bit different. So we look here, it says, no fellowship with God. If our fellowship with God is deep and meaningful, the text says we don't have fellowship with each other. We can't have it. You guys cracking with me still? Or the nods just, falling asleep? And our degree of fellowship with God and each other is determined by the degree we have come into His life. You see, on that final day when the bride is presented, there will be nothing in shadows. There will be nothing hidden. There will just be a perfect, purifying light that's there. That everything which is seen and done will be made obvious. And part of our walk together is to enable us to bring those things that we have in the dark into the light. And in that bringing who we are and what we're about into the light, we start getting drawn closer to each other. Because we then begin to realize that we're more and more like each other. We're more and more like each other, and we aren't that different. See, operating in the dark is not an acceptable option for believers. If we are to have meaningful fellowship and to be made in that pure and spotless bride, it is predicated on the degree with which we walk in the light. We cannot have fellowship in darkness. It will not. Hence why God is called the Father of light, and Satan is referred to the Prince of darkness. That's the whole point behind it. And this is completely consistent with the message John gave in the Gospel of John. John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. If we get to verse 9, it says, the true light, or in verse 6, it says, there was a man sent from God whose name was John the Baptist. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, the light of Christ, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light, Jesus. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. That's Jesus. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. But those who did receive him, those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Born not of natural descent or human decision, but born from God. And John goes on in John 3, right after the John 3:16 text. We're all very familiar with it. In John 19, he goes on and says, this is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people so love the darkness, they refuse to come into the light because their deeds were evil. John makes it clear. Functioning in darkness and secrecy, apart from our brothers and sisters, is separation from God. And the lie is, it's okay, it's acceptable to be off doing your own thing. It's not true at all. You can't even conjure. The only way you can conjure it up is not to read God's Word. Then you might get some traction. But if we read God's Word, it's very clear that coming to Him requires that we step into the light and be seen as we truly are. No matter how ugly it is. It's kind of like a full-length mirror with big old floodlights.